Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on quadratic equations. Today I've got two examples of using the quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations. If you haven't seen my other videos on quadratic equations, please do go and check them out. They'll be in the playlist titled Quadratic Equations. So, we'll start with number 1. It's x squared plus 9x plus 20 is equal to 0. And we're going to be using the quadratic formula. So how do we do that? Well, we start by taking the coefficient of the x, so that's the number in front of the x, and we make it a minus. So we need a minus the 9, because we got the 9, then plus or minus. Remember, you do need plus or minus because there can be two solutions to a quadratic equation. Then we need square root. Now we need this coefficient squared, so we need 9 squared, and then we need minus. Now we need 4 times the coefficient of the x squared and times this number here. So we need 4 times 1, but 4 times 1 is just 1, so that's just 4. So we can forget about the 1. But I will write it in there just so you can see all the steps. So we have 4 times 1, and then finally times the number here, which is 20. Make sure you include everything in here, because otherwise you will make a mistake. And then we need to divide it all by 2 times the coefficient of the x squared, which again is still 1, hasn't changed. So we have 2 times 1, which is just 2. So those of you who are quick with this, you'll see that that's just 2, but it's helpful to write out all the steps so you don't make a mistake. Now, what does this give us? Well, this gives us a minus 9 plus or minus, and now what is 9 squared? What is 9 squared? Well, 9 squared is 81, and then we are subtracting 80 from it. So we end up with the square root of 81 minus 80, which is just 1. 81 minus 80 is 1. And then we're dividing, and 2 times 1 is just 2. So we've got this. Okay, so what does this give us? Let me put a full stop here. So that gives us x is equal to what? Well, we've got the two solutions. So the two solutions are minus 9 plus the square root of 1, and then minus 9 minus the square root of 1. And then we also have to divide by 2. So let's look at the plus first. We'd get minus 9 plus the square root of 1. Well, the square root of 1 is just 1. So we've got minus 9 plus 1, and that's minus 8. And then we have minus 8 divided by 2, which is minus 4. So one of those will give you minus 4. And then the other one, you've got minus 9 minus the square root of 1, so minus 1. So minus 9 minus 1 is minus 10. And then dividing that by 2 is minus 5. So minus 5 is the other solution. So remember, two solutions, minus 4 and minus 5. Okay, and that is number 1 solved. Okay, two solutions. Now, what about number 2? That's a little bit trickier. This time we've got a 2 here, so what do we do then? Well, we start off exactly in the same way that we would normally do. So we do x is equal to minus the coefficient here. And you're thinking, right, that's 4, right? So it's going to be minus 4. No, because we have a minus here. So the coefficient is really minus 4. So now you need to do minus 4, and then two negatives give you the positive. So you end up with a plus 4 instead of a minus 4. So always be on the lookout for if it's a minus or a plus, that coefficient. So here we have 4. We get the 4. Plus or minus, we still get the plus or minus. Always keep the plus or minus. And then square root. b squared. Now, it's minus 4, but when you square it, it still gives you 16. It's the same as taking plus 4 and squaring it. So we still get a square, a 4 squared in here, or minus 4 squared, whichever you prefer. So we get 16. 4 squared is 16. Minus 4 times this number, which is 2, and also times this number, which is 1. So here we need 4 times 2 times 1. So I'll put in 4 times 2, and I'm going to leave the 1 out because it's just 1. It won't change. We're multiplying by 1. But remember, if it wasn't a 1, you would have to keep it in there because it would change the answer. But here, so it's 4 times 2 times a 1. And now we need to divide by 2 times this coefficient of the x squared, so times the 2. So we need 2 times 2 on the bottom as our denominator. So times 2, okay? So always remember to write all these numbers in, okay? Now, what do we get next? We get equals to 4 plus or minus. Now we have to work out this thing in the brackets. 4 plus or minus the square root of 16 minus 4 times 2, and 4 times 2 is 8, so we've got 16 minus 8, and that's just 8. So we've got the square root of 8. I don't know what the square root of 8 is. That looks a bit nasty. And then on the bottom we have 2 times 2, which is just 4. Okay. So this is our solution. We've got one of them is 4 plus the square root of 8 divided by 4, and the other is 4 minus the square root of 8 divided by 4. Now, you may not understand this next step because you may not have seen these square roots before, and the problem is the square root of 8 is not a nice number, okay? So we can't so when we had the square root of say 1 before, it was just 1, and that was easy because we can work that out. But the square root of 8 is harder. You can't just there doesn't seem to be a nice number that works. I mean, you can try to find one, but there doesn't seem to be a nice answer. But you can simplify it, and you can actually simplify it to 4 plus or minus, and I'm going to write 2 times the square root of 2, and then I'm dividing that by 4. Now, this may seem a bit strange, and you might not understand this step. I will be doing a video later on simplifying square roots. So when I upload that, watch it and come back, and then this will make more sense. But that is our answer: 4 plus or minus 2 root 2 divided by 4. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Now, before I finish, I just want to mention the factorizing issue. We won't factorize this one, number 2, because that gives us this horrible answer, and we don't really like that. But we can factorize 1, so that's got two nice answers, minus 4 and minus 5. So how would we factorize number 1? Well, remember, we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give you the 20, and they also need to add to give you the 9. So I'll write it down here, just down here. So factorizing, if you wanted to factorize, you need to write down your brackets, and then you need to put in those numbers that work. So you need to figure out numbers that work. So what numbers would work? Well, perhaps 4 and 5 would work. 4 and 5 give you 9, and then 4 times 5 is 20. So that seems sensible. That seems like it would work. So I will put that, I'll actually put it up here for you, just so you can see just below these solutions. So I have x, and it doesn't matter what order I put them in, so I'll do plus 4 first, plus 4, and then x plus 5. And can you see that this 4 and this 5 are essentially similar to our solutions that we got from the quadratic formula? I hope you can see that pattern. So we've got a plus 4 here, got a plus 4, and we got a plus 5, and our solutions were minus 4 and minus 5. So can you see that pattern? So when you factorize, you already know the solutions to the equation, and if you know the solutions, you can factorize. So remember the solutions, if we put in x is minus 4 here, we'd get minus 4 plus 4, so we'd get minus 4 plus 4, which would give us 0. And the same when we put in the minus 5 in the other bracket, we'd get minus 5 plus 5, which is 0. So the solutions, when you've factorized it, are just what makes these brackets 0. So remember that. I will do another video on it later, going over that in detail. But just remember, once you've factorized it, you can find the solutions by setting the individual brackets equal to 0 and then solving that for x. So I hope this video made sense and helped you understand the quadratic formula a bit better. Don't worry too much about the complicated the square root bit if you don't understand that. Just look out for my later video on simplifying square roots, and it will make sense. But you could leave it in this format here, and that would be perfectly fine. But it is better to simplify if you can. But don't worry if you can't. So look out for my next video. I'm going to be uploading a video on completing the square, which is a third method for quadratic equations. And I will also be uploading some university maths tutorials, which obviously be a higher level and more difficult. So hopefully some other people will find that useful. Alright, well, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.